I thought she looked just fine, as a matter of fact. I think it might have been a little bit of a problem for Larry McMurtry as far as his neighbors were concerned.
Things just kind of continued to go downhill from then on.
I guess I was going through a thing with Michael Hagen, and it might have been his attention that he paid to other women that disturbed me. It must have been about 2 or 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, and I just felt like kind of walking it off. I was in a bad mood, actually, and I went out in my bare feet.
Larry McMurtry. Situation has come up where I might need an attorney. Some friends of mine came in from California yesterday in a big bus on their way to the World's Fair, Ken, Kesey, and several other people. And they had a girl with them who was pretty disturbed. During the night, she got away from us, and the cops picked her up. By the time we got down there, they had put her under psychiatric surveillance.
Where are my friends? Do my friends know I'm here?
They held me in a cell for a little while. Then they had someone come to talk to me. By this time, I was just a complete wreck.
Where am I?
You're in the hospital.
People were asking me a lot of strange questions, and I just didn't answer any of them, except I think I gave them my name, and that was all. Name, rank, and serial number, so to speak.
Where am
You're right around here at the desk. You're in the hospital.
Hello, I'm a nurse. What's your name? Your hand is...
What happened to Stark Naked?
One of her friends in San Francisco came out and got her, and she ended up going back home with him, and that was as far as she got on the trip.
We must prevent that crime. Hurry up, we'll get there in the next time.
We sort of abandoned her. We figured anybody that couldn't hold their shit together just wasn't going to be able to make it. You know, we had a trip to do. We had to keep moving.
And it also made me nervous, thinking, who's going to be left behind next? Is it going to be me?
It should. It could.
Weren't you concerned that this trip was beginning to unravel?
I'll tell you a thing that I learned while I was working in the asylum that I think is the most important thing I've ever learned. Every once in a while, all the power, the attention that you have comes to bear on exactly what you're doing and doesn't decide whether it's good or bad. It just decides that it is. And the only thing you can do is enjoy the ride.
We're coming into New Orleans when the single marching in.
Well, Cassidy wanted to show us New Orleans because he was familiar with it, and he was so excited to be in New Orleans. It was a big, big deal. He had his favorite haunts. He was kind of the tour guide. We went down to the heart of the jazz district. Cassidy was a big jazz aficionado. We loved jazz.
Ah, the old Absinthe Bar.
The old Absinthe
I
Bar.
remember that I was there once, but I forgot.
I was there once.
It was pouring in on us. It was warm, 11 o'clock morning on Canal Street in New Orleans. Is this feeling of everything moving slower and slower.
Slower and slower.
Very thick air.
Caught in some kind of molasses mind warp we were.
That was where we started to drink mint juleps. I think we went down in a basement, too.
We saw somebody had just moved into the other room where there was a piano. And he went in there and sat down, and he started to play.
My baby left me. My baby left me a long time ago.
I know Kesey was just crazy about him. God, he'd come over and he'd say, wow, this guy's great. He wanted to take him with us or something like that.
A woman walked out the door.
Air is still thick with dust motes swirling and following us out the door and up and onto the bus, and there we went.
Moonlight Sinatra boarding with us. And we realized we got to dip this sucker in the water before he goes off. So we said, where can we find some water? He says, go to Lake Pontchartrain. He didn't know where it was. He just heard about it.
Look at the 60s and what started there. Music was changed forever.
The feminist movement started there. The civil rights movement while we were driving that bus across the country. Martin Luther King was in Selma.
Either you give the Negro his God-given rights and his freedom, or you face the fact of continual social disruption and social chaos.
You have to remember this is 1964, and it's right when the civil rights thing was in a very early infancy, so white-only, black-only consciousness was still really prevalent in the South. And the story about Lake Pontchartrain was that we'd pulled into a black-only area of the lake. Of course, the pranksters didn't know that. They just pulled up to this lake because they saw it and wanted to go swimming.
We got out, I'm loaded on acid, right? Okay, and all these other guys are loaded on acid. Okay, here we are. I think I don't notice that anything is odd, even at this point.
As we're swimming around in this hot, humid first day of summer Louisiana day, I remember looking around this swimming hole that we'd all just practically ran and jumped into. I thought, God, there's a lot of colored people here, and there's not very many white people. Well, there's one, there's one, there's one. I looked around, and I had this sudden realization that I knew every single one of the white people in that swimming hole. And then it dawned on me, shit, we just integrated this place. Then all of a sudden, this wave of paranoia went through us all.
Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, that's the kind of thing that could have started a race riot.
I don't believe a word was said. We all just grabbed everything, jumped on the bus, and left. Babs just fell down in the yard in Pensacola, Florida. We went to this place where his old roommates still lived in Pensacola, where they'd been Marines together.
We arrived, and Babs' Marine buddy was still at work. And so Kesey had the idea of making a little theatrical thing to film.
The Flying Queen will lead the way.
Oh, this is funny. I remember this really well. I consider this to be one of the most fucked up days on the whole trip. Being pregnant, I was miserable. It was just really hot, and there was no reason to be there, and there's nothing to do, so we did this. I was trying to be cooperative, but I can tell you that it really had nothing going for me.
This is some kind of absurd dance, as I recall. I enjoyed it. I just wish I could have played the trombone better.
Playing those instruments, god damn it. Somebody starts playing the saxophone for the first time, well, they want it to sound like John Coltrane. Well, they're not gonna sound like John Coltrane. That's what made me so mad. They thought they would just because they wanted to, but you don't. It takes practice.
Here's Babs's friend from Vietnam who rolls in.
Pleased to meet you, sir. Yes, indeed, it's been quite some time. Toodly-doodle. Oh, yes, it's a little strange since the court, don't you think? Uh-huh. I've changed my uniform slightly. And this is my new battalion, yes, quite. Yeah, we've given up helicopters. Most of these guys can only fly at night. So we've given up helicopters. We now travel by bus. It's slower but more deliberate.
We must press onward at all forward speed fast. Ahead fast, late.
Yeah.
Tennis, anyone? Tennis? Where in the hell are we?
Well, now John Babbs became kind of the semi-quasi navigator and became known as Sometimes Missing because one time when he was mapping us through one town, we went through another, and when everybody got off the bus to take a leak and went on again, he wasn't there, and nobody noticed it until about 100 miles later. But then as we turned around to go pick him up, here came a car, and he jumped out. He had hitchhiked and caught up with us.
John Babbs was in the back seat, waving his arms like this and trying to get our attention, so we pulled over and picked him up. That's how we got the name Sometimes Missing.
You know you took
Welcome to New Jersey, speed 50. New Jersey Turnpike. Truck driver I ran into said the Dean Moriarty was an 8-wheel, low-bed, flatbed trailer. He says, yeah, when I read it...
In a way, Cassidy saw himself as a guardian of that trip, and he was. He was driving, but he was not masterminding the situation. That was Kesey's trip.
We are actually fourth-dimensional beings in a third-dimensional body happening in a second-dimensional world. I know, I say second-dimensional, all these primary movements like elemental.
People following him all the time, egging him on to greater heights of self-indulgence. And he always did it. He always tried to be more of this hero that was this self-indulgent, on-the-road, epic legend.
Yes, sir.
License and registration.
Of course.
Where you heading?
250, I think it's Madison Avenue. I've forgotten now.
We all learned a great deal from Neil Cassidy. This is a guy that knows what he's doing, and this is his medium. It's words, it's cars, and it's drugs.
Last night, but the night before, yes, sir. And that's why. Back on the bus. Everybody get back on the bus. Even on the job.
We could all do making noises and hitting sticks together, but to be able to use the most advanced of instruments, which is our mind and our voice. Cassidy could do it better than anybody using words.
New York, 7 days. Speeders lose licenses. Concerto di la Passing Diesel. One-handed delight. No. That's masturbating. No.
He was like a bus driver coming into his land. You know, he'd spent a lot of time in this. He wasn't from New York, he's from Denver. But he'd spent a lot of time back there, you know, back in the days with Kerouac and Ginsberg and those guys. And yeah, I think he first learned to drive as a parking lot attendant in New York, as a matter of fact.
Like I said, exit 9. Turtle 9, exit 9. Love potion number 9. But when they left off, I said, love potion number 9. I lost love potion number 9. There's the Empire State Building dead ahead on 7 miles, 5 miles, 7 possibilities, 7 miles, Empire. That on the right.
Well, coming into New York was exciting because that was our destination.
Welcome to the Bronx.
I was there. This was it. I had made it to New York.
What an unnatural environment when you look at New York with the streets and the cars.
We are the Merry Band of Pranksters.
When we went into New York City, we were all on top of the bus, playing instruments and tootling around everybody. It was a lot of fun, interacting with the people.
You women have heard of jalopies, you've heard the noise they make, but let me introduce my new Rocket 88. Yes, it's straight, just one way. Everybody likes my Rocket 88. Baby, we'll ride in style, moving all along.
You know, I got on the bus when it pulled up in New York, and we drive all over New York. You felt like you were in an aquarium on the other side of the glass.
The public always grinned when they saw that bus. It's like kids when they see an Easter egg. It's simple. There it is. It's colored. It's an egg. Nobody felt the slightest bit threatened by it.
Ken really believed that things could be changed, that consciousness could be changed. He saw himself as a kind of liberator for the generation, and he saw the bus trip as a kind of going to New York, a kind of, you know, Napoleon goes to Paris.
The best the bus ever was when we drove through Harlem. Had all these people running out and following us along in Harlem. All these kids.
Some 2 weeks later, the bus has somehow managed to get across the country. And once again, you encountered the bus.
Yes. 1239 Madison Avenue was where this apartment was that I knew about. The next morning, Pranksters showed up. And they all came in with about 500 pounds of equipment. I mean, they just had wires and cameras and lights, and it was instantly strewn from one end of the apartment to the other. It looked like a bus. It looked like the inside of the bus. And so that night, it was this fantastic party that got sort of out of hand, and the poor doorman kept coming up and saying everybody was complaining, and it went on and on and on and on. And everyone was very excited that Kerouac was there, and he was getting really drunk, and Ginsberg came.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix.
Ginsberg is like a sponge. He can sop up all our poisons. I bought the record Howl. He was kind of like a folk singer to me more than a poet. I knew the sound of him reading before I read any of his stuff.
Set up, smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz.
And when we headed off on the bus, it was only natural that we should head to New York and try to find Ginsberg and Kerouac.
Unfortunately, it wasn't like meeting the author. It was more like, see if we can get him to respond to our antics, which didn't happen. He was not enthused with our craziness.
The thing you gotta realize about Kerouac, it was like he was already sort of an old guy and kind of out of it. He was already crystallized. He was kind of a sad character.
We had been accepted by the old gunfighters, you know. This is the real heavies in our mythologies. Kerouac, Cassidy, Ginsberg.
Neil was more on the right track when he got started with the beat movement.
Kerouac and I met him in '45, so he was only 20 then. And within that year, he and I had a romance that lasted on and off for, well, till at least, I think the last time we were in bed together was '66, so that's 21 years.
I got a whole theory about this man. What he was the real smart Catholic boy who got sucked up by Kerouac. But he was real poetic, like all these Irish Catholics are. And he got in with some poets, and he got aspirations. And somebody plants a little seed of how great you could be because you're so great, so sexy, so poetic. He fell in love with that idea, which was something he couldn't possibly achieve. So then he was split between the two worlds. He couldn't create anything for himself. He couldn't get it together with a lady and have a good family. He couldn't go off and be a faggot with Ginsberg. He couldn't be anything.
It's an exact mimicry of Ginsberg 20 years ago, you know?
Ginsberg used to be wild, huh?
Ginsberg's
so cool
shit.
now.
He used to run over Columbia rooftops waving genitals and manuscript.
The whole point of this trip, supposedly at least in the beginning, was everyone was going to go to the fair. All the pranksters were so excited. This day, we drove to the fair, and it was like the hottest 29th of June it ever had been.
Practically everybody in the world is coming to the fair.
I made my reservation. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I'll find somebody new and there'll be no more sorrow. That's what I do each time, but I can't follow through. I can't break away. Though you make me cry, I can't break away. I can't say.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow.
Well, see, the whole idea, this was what drove me up the wall, was it was going to be made into a movie of everybody running about in the fair. Well, nobody kept together. There was nothing to film. It was all just so dispersed.
Lost sometimes missing again. That's what always happens.
Ken and Babs were so manic and so high. They drank this vile yellow concoction.
Swashbuckler, I'll pull out my sword.
Well, of course, the one thing I wanted to see was where the water ballet was supposed to happen. My whole reason for going to New York was to try to locate a job possibility. Babs and I searched and finally found this beautiful pool and found out they had canceled the whole water ballet.
And these same people probably also take in the exhibit where the wizardry of modern chemistry is presented with entertaining showmanship.
Better things for better living through chemistry for the finer world we want. Better things for better living through chemistry. That's the promise of DuPont.
The fair was trippy and great. When you're high, more variety the better.
You are about to take a journey out of this world into the world of the future. Forget the world around you. Forget the people around you. You are entering Futurama, alone with your own thoughts.
The World's Fair was on, which was a great thing. It was a vision of the future of America, and Ken saw it that way. The irony is that curved-finned corporate America, Tomorrowland, as presented at the 1964 World's Fair, was over before it began. 64. Things were changing. We didn't know that World's Fairs were a thing of the past.
By then, the trip became more important than the destination. Never mind where we're going, it doesn't make a difference where you're going. The whole notion of the trip, take an acid trip, came out of that summer.
The effect is somewhat like looking through a microscope. Suddenly, when you look through a microscope, you discover that there's an invisible world around you that you hadn't known about before you did it. The same thing is true of the psychedelic drug.
After the disappointment of the World's Fair, you headed to Timothy Leary's compound, the International Foundation for Internal Freedom. Was it called IFIF?
IFIF. It was like a 4,000-acre farm outside of Poughkeepsie in Millbrook, New York.
We teach people how to turn on or how to go out of their minds. By turn on, we mean to tune in, to get beyond your routine ways of thinking and acting and experiencing.
Ginsberg is the one that set it all up because he knew those guys at IFIF, and he thought it would be a great opportunity for us to meet each other. It was like the West Coast acid heads meeting the East Coast acid heads and having a powwow.
Let it off!
We pulled into their scene, making a lot of noise. We set off two smoke grenades.
Pranksters have found their merry castle.
They're there. They're there.
And I have to inform you just what's exactly going on.
We're high and they're coming down. That's what's going on.
You know, that quiet time after a trip when you just want to be very mellow. And up drives the bus with these speed freaks. And they come to have fun and play with flutes, and everybody in the house took one look and fled, leaving me to welcome them.
So raise your glass, we'll drink a toast to the little man who sells you thrills along the pier.
The whole Millbrook scene, it was just the other end of the same stick, I think. We were scuffy and didn't have much money and pulled into this mansion, which was upper crust. We felt a kinship to them, but we could also tell that they were wishing that we'd leave.
What everybody anticipated didn't turn out. It kind of fizzled. We waited all day for Leary to show up, and he just avoided us. And then he sort of disappeared with Cassidy, and Cassidy went upstairs and hung out with it. They didn't want us to go upstairs. Alpert was very friendly. He was there.
Just listening to Alpert talk, man, it seemed like he was a fucking crazy man.
All of my games were like going off into the distance. I got this terrible panic because indeed I was going to cease to exist. And I got the panic, which is the panic that precedes the psychological death, because indeed Richard Alpert was dying.
These people scared the shit out of me, man.
They were very clinical and controlled, and we were really free form. We were the explorers, and they were the scientists. And so we just entertained ourselves at this waterfall.
Shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Come on, twist and shout. Come on, baby. Come on, baby.
And that's where Kathy Van Leeuwen got her nickname, Sensuous Experience.
Sensuous X, yes, I remember well. Her name was implied in her very bearing, that is to say, her bodily example.
Kathy was Zonker's girlfriend in college, and that's why Zonker went on the trip.
Sensuous, oh my God, look at her. Oh, she's so much like Marilyn Monroe, right? Now, I'm wondering at this point whether my girlfriend has been having sex with these people or not.
And that's the point at which Kesey started flirting with her, trying to get her attention. And he did get her attention.
Have you ever heard the story about Peggy the Pistol?
He says all my dope is yours as he's fucking my girlfriend. Thanks, Kesey. I wanted to get out of New York as quick as possible. And I was basically telling her that she could get on the bus, but I was gone. But then I realized that I really didn't want to leave her with all these fuckers.
And when they were getting ready to leave town, I had to decide, was I gonna stay or was I gonna go? At that point, I was still planning on staying to work. It didn't work out that way. I got sucked into the Pranksters scene too much, too heavily. So I stayed on the bus.
I wasn't there on the way back. I was so happy to be off of it.
Coming back's a whole nother trip. Cassidy, he didn't come back with us.
The trip across was basically lengths of Neil's driving consciousness. And then on the way back, suddenly the driving duties were thrust upon the rest of us.
Everybody took turns. The guys, anyway. I was on the way back. We just started driving the bus down this abandoned dirt road and ended up at this incredible lake, and there was nobody there but us. We decided we wanted to find a spot to take IT-290.
IT-290 was famous. That's the Rolls-Royce of psychedelics.
Kesey had stolen a jar. He claimed it was the last jar of IT-290 on the planet. And so he wanted a very special place for everybody to take it. So we built a little fire and made a little campground and popped the IT-290 and had the trip. Oh, it was wonderful. It's even better than acid. It's a hallucinogen, but very calm. Acid can have a hard edge to it sometimes, but this is very calming. Colors, very vivid. It was very communal in that you felt connected to everybody.
I thought this was as American as you could get because we were exploring a new territory, just the same way we went to the moon or sent Lewis and Clark expedition here to Oregon. It was part of our American personality. You find a cave, nobody's been in it, you go in it. You try to go down deeper in the ocean and up higher in the sky, and these drugs were opening the door to new landscapes. Once you're through that door and you look out into this vast room with all these windows onto new vistas, you become tremendously excited and want to do what you can to explore it, because you could look around and you saw that there weren't human footprints all over this landscape.
How did the dynamics on the bus change when some of the wives joined the trip back?
At one point, it got all couples. At one point, there were 14 of us on the bus, 7 men and 7 women. Lots of them were married, but not to the person that they were coupling with. I remember one morning we woke up and everybody was fucking. The whole bus was shaking.
Y'all the one. You're the one.
You're the one.
It got a lot heavier on the way back. That was fervor pitch stuff. I think I talked with Kesey about our fucking strange situation. The thing was weird, man, but you couldn't be mad at him. He was really compassionate. I like sensuous, and that was the most difficult part, is having been lovers, not being lovers anymore, and continuing to be friends.
I can't get you out of my mind.
The thing that creates problems in all those husband-wife triangle situations is everybody's hang-up with their own attachment to some kind of belief of the way it ought to be.
When I came through Yellowstone Park with this bus, I saw a sign that said, "Beware of the bear." And something clicked when I saw this, and I thought, there's the problem. There's the whole hang-up that stops me from writing, stops people from singing, stops people from living. Beware of the bear. What did that used to mean? It used to mean be aware of the bear. Now it means be scared of him. This little piece of knowledge, and you can plug it into any person who is now being hassled with the way the world is changing. Goldwater and his bunch are scared.
That extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
There's something happening that is scaring these people, which means that something is happening that's so new, they're scared beyond any powers of reasoning.
0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
All of the themes of my work have to do with America. Traveling across this land, coming to this edge, and then what?
My membranes have passed into an oxidation state.
After we got back to La Honda, after the bus trip, we had a very purposeful ritual to get out from under this bus thing. We took all of our bus clothes and put them in a pile and set fire to them because I wanted to be done with it. I wanted to get back to business. I had books to write, kids to raise, but it wouldn't die. People just kept coming around.
Like little jackrabbits gaily crossing the pasture that morning. So
What happened with us, we were making that movie, and pretty soon on Saturdays when we showed it, people were coming to see what it was.
and the red barn and the kids on the beach in the stream saying,
We really didn't project it until I'd finished editing it, reel to reel, in chronological order, and we showed it from beginning to end without stopping, so 30 hours straight. And so for part of it, everybody slept through it, of course. Cassidy, of course, he took speed, was awake, and was the one who ended up running the projector and talking very softly. And now we're coming to New York, enjoying every second of it. But he was the only one awake. Absolutely everybody was asleep.
he's babbling just like he always He's out of his nuts.
Every Saturday, they'd come around more and more because we would do these Saturday night trips. And finally, there were just too many coming around. So I realized, I got to get this out of my house because otherwise I won't be cleaning up all week long for the rest of my life. So we just said, okay, next time we're going to do this in Santa Cruz at Badge's house, which was really the beginning of the acid tests. And after that, he said, I don't want it in my place. He said, okay, next time we'll do it in San Jose. So each time we just said, next week on Saturday, it'll be happening there.
I'm flying down deserted streets, wrapped in mother's wine and sheets, asbestos boots on flaming feet, dreaming of forbidden treats, wearing uniforms on nighttime beats. I said,
When we started doing the acid test, we took on the Dead as sort of our backup band.
We'd heard about Kesey and the Bus. They'd been doing outrageous things for quite a while and had a reputation for it. And for us, it seemed like a real interesting thing to go and check out.
well, someone's trying to tell me where it's at.
And they were our first and best audience. The Pranksters were, you know, they were the first ones to get off on us.
Leather wings like a vampire bat. I fly away to my cold water flat and eat my way.
They weren't just playing what was on the music sheets, they were playing what was in the air.
It's plain to see.
When the Dead are at their best, the vibrations that are stirred up by the audience is the music that they play. That means that the band has to be supple enough to really read the notes written on the wall.
They say I've begun to lose my grip. My hold on reality's starting to slip. Tell me to get off of this trip. They say that it's like a sinking ship.
It moved on from that exponentially from one place to another place.
Come down, plain to see. I've been set free.
LSD is a really groovy way to find out more about the things around you.
LSD helps me understand the whole world better.
LSD helps you to understand your own mind.
Once Pandora's box is open, you can't regulate who gets to use the stuff that flies out of it.
Well, I'm terribly frightened by the problem with LSD. I think there's been a great deal of misinformation by those who seem to see no harm in it. But as a parent and as a citizen, and certainly now in this position, I am greatly concerned.
A powerful new drug capable of producing weird and dangerous hallucinations had found its way onto the streets. We had to try and stop it.
The government said, stop that experiment. All these guinea pigs that we've sent up there into outer space, bring them back down, and don't ever let them go back up there again because we don't like the look in their eyes.
He's clean, Joe.
Creation,
except
reality.
for these.
Oh, sugar cubes. I'll make you book he's been dropping that acid we've been hearing about.
Evil! Evil! Evil!
All right, come on, son. Settle down.
Hospital people, whether they want to or not, are becoming expert in the handling of LSD users in trouble.
Some people have a bad experience the first time they take the drug. Others take it 30, 60, or even 100 times before their bad trip. And the bad trip? Instant insanity. Often a never-never land of no return.
No, get away.
Some others who take LSD will have even more tragic freakouts. Many lose all contact with reality. Some forget what height means, and in a turned-on or euphoric state, step or attempt to fly from cliffs and high windows with real-life, permanent, non-psychedelic results. Other trippers attempt to merge their beings with large, vast automobiles.
With all the hype about LSD, you were busted with marijuana?
It wasn't even grass charges. It was being in a place where marijuana was.
Kesey, do you feel you did something wrong?
I feel like you only come to this movie once, and if you don't get something rewarding out of every minute you're sitting there, then you're blowing your ticket.
Let's assume the worst. Supposing they do come back with conviction, would you appeal?
But if I could just concede in some way and let them stick me in jail and do my time, I would do it and save the taxpayers and everybody else a lot of trouble.
The aim of the sheriff and the probation department has been to rehabilitate Mr. Kesey, to get him back into writing, back into the career where he seems to have the most talent.
Walking young in the morning, do my honey.
In 6 months, your kids grow a lot. That's what they take away from you in jail. That's a drag. I don't want ever to go to jail.
You didn't hear no baby cry today.
One flew out of a cuckoo's nest today. That is if you consider jail a cuckoo's nest. Federal charges were dropped, and the last obstacle, San Francisco bail, was set at $3,500 plus penalties. Kesey will be back in court November 9th, hopefully. In the meantime, he will tell the teenage world of the evils of drugs and probably describe a long trip.
Are you repudiating LSD and other hallucinatory drugs?
There's enough LSD around now and enough young kids around who are able to manufacture this that it's impossible for the police to do anything about it.
You think this new law is turning them off then?
I don't know that you can turn them off, but I think you may be able to move them on.
Do you consider yourself becoming one of us squares, perhaps?
God, I hope not.
The commencement exercises for LSDU will be held on Monday night. That's Halloween. And, of course, the man who is going to be passing out the diplomas is Ken Kesey. Well, Ken, what's the theme of this commencement exercise?
Trick or treat. When I first proposed the idea to Jerry Garcia, the leader of the Grateful Dead, who's playing up there now, that it's time to graduate from acid, he says, hallelujah.
It was a test, and there were people that passed and there were people that didn't pass. I mean, we gave out diplomas for people that we felt like really had passed it.
Are you a member of the graduating class tonight?
No, I flunked the acid test.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, the stipulations that Ken put up, I didn't pass.
We went wild for a while. We went wild because we'd been caged up for 50,000 years. We went wild and found out there was more than we had been led to believe. And now
unless we start finding the little piece of it that we could call the reins, it's going to get away from us. This doesn't necessarily mean you stop taking acid, but you stop repeating the trips. Every head knows that he takes a drug to eventually stop taking it. And I think that it's time for a great number of them to stop. I believe that drugs have now become a fashion.
The hate scene has changed, all right. The flower not only is wilted, it's dead.
Going to leave this broke down palace on my hands and my knees. I will roll, roll, roll.
The hippies is often a strange world in which they live in. They take many trips. And the trip of the hippies is generally an unusual one. And marijuana, of course, with LSD, is being used.
All of these drugs were being fed into the culture by the CIA.
The LSD was not the whole story.
I didn't believe it for a long time. Well, Allen Ginsberg says, you know who was paying for that? It was the CIA. I said, oh, no, Allen, you're just paranoid. But he finally got all the records, and it did turn out the CIA was doing this, and it wasn't being done to try to cure insane people, which is what we thought. It was being done to weaken people and to be able to put them under the control of interrogators.
I was so naive. I believed these doctors knew what they were doing. You know, this is the American government. How could they make a mistake?
Listen to the river sing sweet songs to rock my soul.
We finally got out of jail. We were perfectly willing to leave that whole area down there, which offered excitement, but no stability.
It's funny, in your prankster days, you were seen as being part of a group that had made such a break with the past. And yet here you are living on a family farm. You're, I believe, still married to the woman who you've been married to since, was it 1956?
Long time, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's been this incredible continuity in your life between past and present in a lot of ways.
Yeah. My wife and I met in junior high, and all of our families are still very close. This schism between this one consciousness and this consciousness, I believe, has been arbitrarily forced on us. I've always been a fairly reliable, straight up the middle of the road citizen that just happens to be an acid head.
Ken's a born leader. I mean, he's just got charisma coming out of his ears. Cassidy was not that kind of person. He really wasn't. Once he didn't have the bus to drive or a function, he was really like a liability. You've heard the stories about him and Ann Murphy. Oh, don't you know this? Oh, God. They were on a heavy sadomasochist trip. I'm really old-fashioned when it comes to stuff like that. I don't think a relationship is worth jack shit if you're not making things good and happy. Compare this with Ken and Faye. They've been good for each other. See, they take care of each other. They don't let each other just go downhill and get more and more fucked up. On the contrary, they take good care of each other.
Were you surprised to learn that Cassidy was found dead beside the railroad tracks in Mexico?
When he died, I felt like that he'd accidentally killed himself on purpose. I can picture myself in his shoes exactly. And there's no place else to go, really. Might as well meet the angels.
point did you decide to give up the kind of prankster's life? The story that I've heard is the pranksters went to Woodstock. You didn't want to go. And when they came back to a sign hung in your driveway that just said, no.
Well, there were 61 people when they headed out to Woodstock, and after they were gone, I went upstairs, and we live in a barn. At that time, there was still hay in the loft of the barn, and I found out one of these little hippie warrens where they dug in with their ratty old sleeping bags and their copy of Zap magazine, and stuck right down in the hay bale was a candle, which had burned right down to the hay before it had gone off, and I thought, there's certain things that take precedent over enlightenment.
And that's when you send everybody home, basically.
Yeah.
How much writing have you been doing over the past few years?
Oh, quite a lot. I write all the time. I just don't publish that much.
I've got 4 kids, and there's a lot of the same energy that goes into raising a family, that goes into putting a book together like Notion. Once you get a lot of stuff in the air, you can't stop, because you'll forget it. And that kind of consciousness I have not had, and I think it's because, I'm running a big farm. That's what occupies my mind. Either that, or I've fried my marbles, just like everybody thinks.
When people ask me what I think my best work is, I always say the bus. Novels are a dime a dozen, but there's only one bus further.
What it meant was that everybody had to consider a new way for things to be. Don't you know that we're all one? The deeper I got into it, the more I realized it was a different force working. The only big mistake we ever made as a force was thinking for a while that we were going to win. We developed vested interests in the victory to come. We began to parcel off into little groups, whether it's feminism or politics, for money, religion, whatever it is, everybody is jumping up and down in front of it until nobody can see it clear anymore. Now, if we'd never made that mistake, we'd been way ahead, and this is kind of why I'm retiring from the ranks.
There's something about what we're doing is that we're meant to lose every time. You make these forays, you write these books, you perform this music, but the big juggernaut of civilization continues and you get kind of brushed to the side. But I think all through history there's been these kind of divine losers that just take a deep breath and go ahead, knowing that society is not going to understand it and not even caring because they're having a good time.
Sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me what a long, strange trip it's been.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in. Keep trucking, like the doodah man. Together, more or less in line. Just keep trucking on.
Arrows of neon and flashing marquees out on Main Street. Chicago, New York, Detroit, and it's all on the same street. A typical city involved in a typical daydream. Hang it up and see what tomorrow brings.
Dallas got a soft machine. Houston, too close to New Orleans. New York got the ways and means and just won't let you be. trucking like the doodah man once told me. You got to pay your hand. Sometimes the cards ain't worth a dime if you don't lay 'em down. Sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me, what a long, strange trip it's been. Trucking, I'm going home. Whoa, whoa, baby, back where I belong.